To this session. I think this is I've been looking forward to this session. I think this is talking about the role of the private sector with smallholder farmers. I think it's a chance to synthesize many of the themes and the ideas that have come up in the course of the day. And I'd just like to capture a couple of those. Deputy Minister this morning talked about the priority is a supply of sufficient and safe food and building an enabling environment to allow this to happen. The ambassador in his remarks spoke of the new engines of growth and the top-down opportunities from international private sector for smallholders. Dr. Reardon gave us a very useful template of looking at how the quiet revolution and food security success triangle, looking at the urban-rural value chains, how smallholder farmers are becoming diversified, and the importance of expanding opportunities of rural livelihood. I think we have a very good panel here today. It's eclectic. We have Dr. Tin Htut, many decades in agriculture from the government perspective. Myint Kyaw from LIFT itself, with experience many years in the private sector in finance, and two private sector leaders in the community. David from Nestle, he's the country manager of Nestle Myanmar, been working here since 2012. And as I learned just before this, Nestle, not just a global brand, but a global brand that's been in business next year. It'll be 1.5 centuries, 150 years of leadership in the agri-food department. And our other speaker from the private sector is Ken Shein, who is the founder and CEO of Prime Holdings. Prime is an export-oriented agribusiness in Myanmar. It works on primary production, post-harvest, and value-added processing. And as we hear from Ken often, he's a very strong proponent, and I believe a leader in the community on food safety. And I'm seeing at least, there's been a lot of talk today about dynamic changes in the agricultural economy here. I think one of those changes that we're seeing is how the donor community and the private sector community are talking to each other and beginning to work with each other. LIFT, for example, has dedicated new staff and new impetus to working with the private sector and finding opportunities for partnerships. I know of at least one LIFT project which has an innovative marriage of a traditional implementation partner, an international NGO, and a private sector firm. I think that's a very good example. At my organization, USAID, not a day goes by that we're not talking to someone in the private sector about how we can work together. And we're on the verge right now of a number of memorandums of understanding with different firms in different sectors of how we can do business together. So I find this cross-fertilization that I believe is really picking up momentum in this country between the agricultural industries, both regional and international, the NGOs and the donors, a very healthy approach. And so I'm very pleased that LIFT is included in this panel today, and I'm happy that I'm able to be part of it. And we'll run this like Andrew did the panel this morning. However, we have 4 speakers and we have 1 hour. So we're going to have to be a little quicker in the amount of time we devote to the speaking, because we do want to get to what proved this morning, I think, to be most valuable, was the comments and the questions and the dialogue between you, the audience, and our panel. So I will ask the 4 panelists to limit their initial remarks to maybe 8 minutes. I'll be trying to watch the time closely on that. And then when we've all concluded, we'll elicit suggestions, comments, questions, challenges from the floor, and spend the rest of our hour in what I expect will be a rich conversation. So I would like first to give the floor or the podium to Dr. Tin Htut. I think we're very happy, very proud that you're with us today. He introduced himself briefly this morning, but I think it's worth reiterating. Many decades in agriculture. He's now the, most recently, 2 months ago, the Director General of the Department of Agricultural Planning in the Ministry of Agriculture and Irrigation. Previously, you may know that he was Director of Yazin Agricultural University. So he's a true scholar and authority on agriculture, and he's going to give us some broad perspectives and principles on the role of investment in the agri sector. Dr. Tip, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kyaw. First of all, I would like to express my heartfelt thanks to Lifton Mark, our sister ministry, Ministry of Livestock, Fishery and Rural Development, who gave me a chance to talk about the important meeting here today, this afternoon. And in fact, like Mr. Goggin introduced, I'm a Director General of the Department of Agricultural Planning. I act as a coordinator for the Ministry of Agriculture and Irrigation for respective department. In fact, I need to apologize, I didn't prepare my presentation for PowerPoint. Anyway, the words are coming from my heart and my years of experiences. I'd just like to talk about it. In fact, I try to remind myself that of course, I must admit that I'm one of the 6 blind Brahmin. It's a very amusing 6 blind Brahmin and elephants. So these are the story we really have to keep in mind. If I invited a farmer here, I'm not sure what he's going to say. Anyway, forget it. Now we are talking about the farmers. All right. So where I represent the Ministry of Agriculture and Irrigation, very important thing is ministry is quite aware of how to double the farming incomes. So ministry said that sustainable market, which is very important. Try to have a sustainable market, assist to have a farmer sustainable market, and very needlessly, good quality seeds. And then the good agricultural practices. And then what else? And the input efficiency, input use, and the timely use of all the inputs, including irrigated water. And what else? And reducing the production cost and transaction cost. So everything's there. And lastly, not the least, very important thing is the emerging agro-based industry. I think these are along the line to develop smallholder farmers. I think this is time. I'm glad that all plans comes together, and NGOs, civil society organization. Nowadays, I don't really want to say NGO. I want to say civil society organization. There are other parts, and of course, development partner. I don't want to say development partner. So FAO educate me instead of calling development partner. I should say resource partner. Of course, I was recently educated in FAO headquarters. They just started saying the resource partner. Of course, even in FAO also, 2 different organizations are come together, like WHO and FAO together this time. Now, private sector and civil society organizations are here today. So I'm so glad that. So for ministry, I represent the government ministry. So civil society organization on the right hand, and the private sector at the left hand. So everything comes together. So it's a perfect time for us. And important thing is we need to seal the gap. No need to mention private sector is important. Everything. When you look back the 1994 publication, 1994 work with UNDP and FAO, investment strategy, state apply for that. This is very important. How do we do that? Of course, we know what to do. We know why we have to do, but how and who is not really sure. This is the problem. So for us, like this morning, one of the panelists from the Ministry of Livestock, Fishery and Rural Development said the capacity. We are just not transforming ourselves in the new era. We try to adjust ourselves. So most of our people are not really well adjusted. So this is a very important capacity building in terms of market. For example, there is no market extension, market-led extension. So extension workers must be trained, extension agency must be trained. And in fact, when I asked to do a panelist, I was planning to talk about the extension. But anyway, this is the same thing, private sector, and the farmer has to be extended. After all, extension means taking the science, taking the education to the people. That it is, how do we reach out? This is the important thing. So for me, it is very encouraging. When I see the market over there, you have developed wonderful materials that need to be appreciated, that needs to be acknowledged, and that need to enjoy the strong political support. So my message here is private sector, as well as to civil society organizations. Please come and work with us. The doors are opening for you. And we have a lot of opportunities ahead of us, and challenges are ahead of us. So that means risk. So where to invest? To know where to invest is we must develop the supply chain, the value chain. The value, of course, I must admit that I'm not an economist. I don't know much about economists. But of course, my background is plant breeding, genetics, and at least I have to deal with social. So agriculture is complicated. A while ago, Mr. Kenneth and I talked about this is not a rocket science, but somehow rocket science is very definite. You can do with calculation, but with agriculture is difficult. If you do with the plant, still okay. But if you work with farmers, things are complicated. This is a moving target. Therefore, I think I don't really have to reiterate about that. And private sector investment. And Myanmar has been doing before. Our ministry believe that seed jump, in the technology jump, and fertilizer jump, investment jump is very important. So to leapfrog, I'm sure responsible investment and need-based investment. What I said responsible, everybody talked about the environment. That's why I said that responsible investment and need-based, which is very important. Therefore, needless to say, small farmers need proper investment from private sector. Like, I don't really have to elaborate much more about this. Like Dr. Radon said that we would love to see agricultural mechanization farmers. How can they buy it? Because the rental services are there. So to sum up, to be able to invest properly, investment climate, which is very important. Investment climate. Some investment climates may be suitable for some private sector, some may not be suitable. So one thing is, we need you, ministry needs you, civil society organization, as well as private sector. Thank you so much.
I will go straight to the conclusion. Probably more of a commercial or private sector emphasis. But what we're seeing, and it's become more evident, is that we have all an aligned interest in this commercialization of the rural areas. Basically, we see this amazing opportunity today. Myanmar has the potential for its agri and food business industry by 2030 to be a $30 billion industry. We call this the 30-30 vision. I will talk about the who, the what, the how, the why, the when. The when is now. Everyone's talked about this crossroads. Let's develop that a little bit. First, I'd like to dispense with a potentially thorny issue. It's always, what is the definition of a smallholder? I really don't want to get hung up with what the definition is. For us, we never even used the term smallholder a year and a half ago. I just want to have a common definition. We basically look at what is defined largely by this audience of a smallholder as people that are in agricultural business, in rural farming, most of them being subsistence farmers, meaning that they farm because they don't really have much choice. So there are a few characteristics that are important that we look at as we plan and execute our own partnership with these smallholders. So I'll use the term smallholder, but so we understand the nomenclature. Basically, these are people that are growing one monsoon crop a year, a rain-fed crop. Typically, the biggest risks that they have are offtake, or what we call a market access, as well as the price volatility. Commercialization and good commercial principles, we believe, should be applied in all of this poverty alleviation, in the rural development. There are many terms used like inclusion. I'm just new to many of these terms ourselves. But in the end of the day, what we're basically saying here from the private sector is that there needs to be a commercialization. And commerce, yes, involves profits, but profits are not a bad thing. And if we don't have profits, we will not have poverty alleviation and income generation growth. The key is how to do this responsibly in a way that we help to commercialize the 60% of the rural population that comprise Myanmar's base of the pyramid. These are the smallholders. And we believe that how we do this is not possible to build a significant supply chain required for a $30 billion industry by 2030 without mobilizing and integrating these rural farmers. Now, again, commercial principles. At the end of the day, the private sector follows the market. We follow commercial principles. And there's no reason why these commercial principles cannot also be applied in the development side, which many of you come from, and whose involvement is very important. There are a few things that are happening in the world trend today. And it's very simple macroeconomics, supply and demand driven. Many of these stem from what we call structural deficits in international markets for food ingredients, for food. Garlic, a ton of garlic goes from China, goes to Germany, gets processed, gets dried, gets stored, then gets ordered by a factory in Indonesia or a factory in America, gets shipped back there. So many of these structural deficits by crop and also by region, and there are also changes in weather patterns that basically we can say this is a great opportunity for Myanmar to take advantage of. The other, I can't be here without talking about food safety, but this is also a great opportunity right now. Food safety and low residues and compliant, it is a great opportunity. We're at a crossroads in Myanmar for what we need from this is the government policy, we need implementation, we need the leadership and the guidance from the private sector as well as from the government to basically say that food safety, why shouldn't Myanmar population also have the right to food safety? So shouldn't we produce at a quality, at a standard, which is as good as for the export high value food safety compliant markets? And if we raise the bar there, then we all benefit. That's why we many times say that food security should not be discussed without food safety. In the end of the day, water. We don't really talk about water much, but as a commercial concern, we cannot meet our demand, we cannot meet our clients' requirements without having water year-round. So having water year-round allows us to be able to farm 2 to 3 crops a year in a professional and commercial way. So back to the point of commercialization. By investing in the water resources and irrigation, this is something that Prime is doing, but we need to extend that with the help of the government, and this is where also the development community can play a very vital role in helping us to bring water resources into more areas so that over time, by 2030, we have well-irrigated, year-round water supply. The development economics are very simple mathematics. It's not calculus, it's not even algebra. If you can grow 3 crops a year and they're higher value, because you have water, you can do the simple math, going from 1 crop to 3 crops, and then 3 higher value crops. So maybe it's not what a lot of people want to hear, but I don't think the future for Myanmar is a 2 rice crop mix going forward. Paddy 2 times a year with corn is not going to move us out of poverty and alleviation or get us to be a $30 billion industry. So with that, Dr. Martin Luther King he was a champion of civil rights and social equality at a very special time in America's history. It was a transformative time. He stood up and he stood out, and he basically made his dream a reality by standing up. This is what we need to do today. And the vision here is 30-30. And what it basically means is that if we're going to reach that, everyone needs to stand up. The government, the private sector, and the development community. And I have to say personally, this has exceeded our expectations. This whole idea of bringing private sector together with the development sector and the government, this will not happen unless we all stand up and we stand up and we stand out and we do this together. So California. The reason I show this example is because it's a possibility, it shows what can be done. So I'm just going to run through this real quickly. California supplies more than 40% of America's fresh produce, fruits, and dairy products. The total farm output is about $45 billion, of which 30 over billion is just crops. The other 7 billion, I think, is dairy and milk, and then livestock is the rest. Not to minimize it. David's going to talk about the dairy, I'm sure. Here's a very interesting statistic. This central coast of California, this Central Valley of California is world-renowned for its agricultural productivity. Let's discount what's happening on the water side for the last years here and going forward. But this area is about less than 10% of the irrigable and cultivable land, which is our commercial focus, which is the southern Shan State and the corridor of the Irrawaddy River between Sagaing and Macroeconomics. Now, we choose these areas for commercial reasons, because in these two zones, we can grow almost any crop required around the world, except for some tropical crops like palm oil and rubber and things which we're not into anyway. The other thing of interest is that there were some discussions about labor costs, and so I just made a note that the minimum wage in California today is $9 an hour, $70 per day. So we can think about the implications of that. Okay. This is when you start to look at then how do you get to 30 billion? This is the list of the highest value crops in California in 2012. At the top was table grapes. This corridor between Sagaing and Macroeconomics is an amazing agronomic zone for table grapes. There is no reason why Myanmar, with its agronomic zone and its water resource there, can become an industry of this size in Myanmar. Lettuce. Did you ever think that lettuce was a $1.5 billion value chain just from California? We can grow lettuce all day long in Shan State. Tomatoes. What's really interesting about tomatoes, it's 1.2 billion, of which 1 billion is processed tomatoes. So when U Tin Htut talked about seed varieties, the seed variety for a tomato that you eat on your table is a different seed variety than that which you use for processing in a soup or a paste. So you wouldn't go to the fabled inlay farmers and say, we want to do a tomato paste factory, we'll buy your inlay tomatoes. No, it doesn't work like that. This is where the commercialization part of the private sector has a role to play in helping to bring about the cultivation practices, bringing the varieties, and etc. And this also highlights why we don't speak about an agri-industry without a food industry. We believe that we must be looking at agri and food together, because by the ability to establish a strong agricultural primary production supply chain, it will bring behind it food industry, food processing industry, both intermediate foods as well as finished foods. And that solves a lot of huge post-harvest problems. That creates non-farm labor, that creates diversity of livelihood, that reduces risk, and many of the speakers before have talked about some of these issues. So when we speak about agri, I submit that we include agri and food together. Anyway, I'm not going to go through the list, but you can get an idea that Myanmar's exports last year of agricultural products and food products was less than 1.2 billion, which was one value chain from California. Now, in terms of the potential, again, why is it that we can do this in Myanmar? In terms of agronomic zones, we have the agronomic zones. In terms of water, people talk about the dry zone. It is not a dry zone, except that it is known as an arid or semi-arid area. But the Irrawaddy River is one of the biggest rivers in the world that has an average flow rate or discharge rate of approximately 13,000 cubic meters per second. Now, what does that really mean? Well, if we compare that to the Sacramento Valley, which runs right through the heart of one of the most fertile and productive agricultural areas of the world, which is in California, it is about 15 times the flow rate of the Sacramento River. And with 13 million cubic meters per second, you can irrigate over 12 million acres of land. So this kind of leads, one of the conclusions is that the investment in irrigation and water resource development in a dry zone is what we need to do also to get to the 30-30.
Ken, leave a few minutes for people to ask you more probing questions.
So I think I'll finish with that. I'd like to thank the LIFT board who have made a big impact on how we even shape our own approach, and many of the people here from the implementation partners. Thank you.
I think Ken's presentation was quite eloquent, and it shows a little bit what can be achieved if we all actually push in the same direction. I will maybe take a step backwards, and I will talk a little bit about the wider role that private companies or any other organization can play in the development of a country like Myanmar. A successful company or organization actually produces or offers services that add value. They offer things that consumers value, that's what they buy. When a company stops offering value things, the company loses relevance, and in the end, it goes bankrupt. But if a company really wants to be successful in the long term, it has or it must add value to society at large. It cannot just stop on what they offer economically, but it should go beyond that. When I say add value, I mean create value for everybody that interacts within an environment. For instance, a company should add value, must add value to the people that work in that company, to the employees of that company, by paying fairly, by treating fairly, by giving respect. Companies must add value to the small communities that they operate in by providing fair education, by providing fair treatment, by not polluting the area where they work in. So all this creating shared value concept is what companies that are successfully in the long run should or must apply, and to be able to have an inclusive way of making business. This morning I think there was a few mentions of the word inclusion. Yeah? And I think this, even for private companies, it is very important for the success in the long term. But of course, the position that companies play in society bring many opportunities, many economic opportunities. But at the same time, it brings responsibilities. Responsibilities to comply at the highest standards with the laws, with the regulations of the countries, the responsibility to conduct business in an ethic way, the responsibility to behave in the correct way, the responsibility to respect the differences of the environment that we operate. And this is the responsibility that if it's not met by the companies, then long-term success and development and prosperity will not come. It's kind of like a vicious circle. If the environment that we operate prospers economically, then business will prosper, and basically the long-term success is assured. This concept is basically exemplified a little bit in the pyramid that you see in there. I know that this is very small, but in the base of the pyramid basically talks about the compliance, as I said before. This is the base of any private sector company or organization. Really have the compliance to the laws and regulations needed. In the middle of the pyramid, you have the environment. I think on this one there was a lot of talk about environment and how we have the responsibility to leave the environment in a better shape that we inherited when we arrived in a community or an environment. And on the top is the creating shared value. Different companies have different ways of creating value. Nestle, the company that I work with, focuses on three main areas. Focuses on nutrition, on educating mothers, professionals, families, on how to better nourish their children. We also focus in an area of water conservation, and we focus on an area that is very relevant to the subject that we're talking today, which is basically rural development. And when it comes to rural development, we participate in several forums. One of the forums that we participate is the Economic Forum Myanmar Agricultural Network. And in this one, as Nestle, we lead the coffee stream. And just as an example on how we engage as a private company with small farmers, we basically identify 3 key areas where we want to contribute, where we want to actually engage. And these 3 areas are training. The second one is the identification of the best varieties. In this case, is coffee, for the farmers to understand which are the best varieties that will actually grow well and have better yields and resist better to the problems of the environment where they will be grown. And the third one is in quality certification. And in each of these areas, we collaborate with development organizations, we collaborate with other companies from the private sector, and also we collaborate with the government. Yeah. So again, is a triangle that will actually lead to a faster development of the agricultural network here in Myanmar. Okay, thank you very much.
I'll use the term, but we've heard it a number of times today about responsible investment. And what I think you've just done, David, is describe from the standpoint of a commercial firm what responsible investment means, how a firm sees themselves as complying, strengthening the environment, creating shared values. And you've also demonstrated how a firm like that acts in the environment of Myanmar, a country in transition, by focusing on small farmers, by participating in organizations, working with donors. So again, it's a term that we all use. Here we see a firm, if they've been commercially successful for 1.5 centuries, I think they've learned and proven how a responsible investment firm visualizes their role in the country and how they comport themselves as a commercial firm. You mentioned one thing I just wanted to tell the group about. There is one place where private sector energies are coming to bear increasingly on agriculture in this country is a group called the Myanmar Agribusiness Network. It was organized a few months ago by the World Economic Forum. The World Economic Forum has created a body in Africa called Grow Africa that brings together the energies of private sector, the government, international organizations. They're building another group called Grow Asia, and this Myanmar Agribusiness Network, of which both Ken and David are leading voices, is a new organization in Myanmar. I think it will create many opportunities to, as both of you said, stand up, work together, and align our interests with the small farmers. Thank you for your comments, David. And we keep talking about the small farmer. We're talking about how they link and take advantage of larger scale private sector. But we've also heard many times, and we know this, that small farmers struggle when it comes to raising capital, to having finance. And I think some of the research you were sharing with us, Sergey, looking at how much are they investing in mechanization, or how much are they having to rely on owned or hired labor. This part of that is a capital issue, a capital question. So our last speaker is Myint Kyaw from LIFT, who will talk about financial inclusion challenges and opportunities for smallholder farmers.
Well, thank you. Microfinance institutions, Myanmar Agricultural Development Bank, cooperatives, and also government schemes, they all are providing agricultural loan to about 3 million farmers in our country, which is roughly about 47% of the total farmland in our country. But since a couple of years ago, there has been a noticeable increase of the delinquency among the farmers. So I see that there is a need of financial inclusion in the agricultural loan program. So financial inclusion, what I mean here is the actions to promote the access and usage of the broad range of responsible financial services targeting to the financially excluded people. Financially excluded means, unbanked people, underbanked people, that means including the poor households. Here are key words about the responsible finance, which also cover some of the characteristics like client protection, affordability, appropriateness. So these are the important characteristics of the financial inclusion. More importantly, the poor, inclusion of the poor are also very important. Inclusion of the poor is also very important. Most of the agricultural loans are designed to collect the repayment at the harvest time. But what does it mean by harvest time? It's very general and very from one place to another, from one crop to another. Even in one plot of a village, the harvest time is very varying. And also, we assume that the service provider assume that farmers they will have the money by selling the crops at the harvest time. That is why the collection of repayment are designed to collect at the harvest time. Now, how the farmers sell, farmers thresh, farmers manage their post-harvest are mostly neglected and forgotten. Therefore, when we provide only the agricultural loan, these are mostly the supply-driven. So I think there's a need to shift from agricultural loan to agricultural financing, which agricultural financing means addressing both needs and markets of the supply and demand. There are opportunities for the private sector to work in the agricultural financing mechanism in addition to the agricultural loan. I'd like to brief some of the key financial services where the private sector can be engaged. One of them is lease financing, as well as it is also called hire purchase scheme. In 2001, EU program in Montenegro was very successful, providing the lease financing to the dairy farmers. But in Myanmar, microfinance institutions are allowed to implement the lease financing mechanisms. So, but it was just the law was just allowed in a couple of months. But I think it is a good time to look at the partnership opportunity with the private sector. So in Montenegro, with the partnership with the private banks, documentation process can be done within 10 minutes. Another service is a contract farming, which minimizes the risk of the price instability as well as the quality issues. There are challenges for the contract farming as well, depending on the types of the contract. In Myanmar, Masiko is implementing similar projects in Lapota. Farmers, they had to pay back their loan at the harvest time, where in most of the cases, the harvest time is the lowest price of the grain. To recover this, one of the refinancing services introduced here in Myanmar is the inventory credit system, which is also called warehouse receipt financing, by which farmers it's up to the farmers whether they want to sell. They can sell at the harvest time, or they wait until the price is increased at the reasonable price. They can approach, including the smallholders, they can approach to the credit inventory services and get the small loans to pay back to the other loan. What is missing in the market, but it is also important, is the insurance service. Last night there was a news in the TV that one of the Thailand insurance company, Pettinari, signed an agreement with the Ministry of Labor to provide to sell the personal accident insurance and also life insurance to the migrant workers in Myanmar. Myanmar migrant workers working in Thailand. So it is a beauty of the financial services. And also beauty of a partnership with the private sector, how the issues of the poor people are addressed. So therefore, this is my way forward. I have three way forwards. One is to work with the government for the policy changes, policy development, and regulatory creating the enabling regulatory environment to allow the private sector and the civil society work together. Another way forward is we need to promote the engagement of the private sector in the financial inclusion services. For example, downscaling the bank services to the poor people, as well as like a contract farming, hire purchase scheme. As well as we need to also support to the microfinance institutions and also cooperatives to upscale their services to serve to the market gap. Here, cooperatives means any society following the cooperative principles. Thank you.